Okay, this is your Chapter 7 pre-lecture for week 3 of your Transitions Didactic course. As you grow from an LVN to an RN, your new role will place a greater responsibility on you to make decisions and to guide care for patients. RNs must have good clinical judgment in order to provide quality care. So from Chapter 7, we are going to learn about critical thinking and clinical judgment. At the beginning of your chapter, there's a quote by Carl Sagan that says, "Knowing a great deal is not the same thing as being smart. Intelligence is not information alone, but also judgment, the manner in which information is collected and used." And I think you have probably already found that to be true in the fields of nursing and healthcare. There's also an element of intuition that has been useful personally in my nursing career and also um, in many other instances of nursing. A lot of people experience intuition. Critical thinking helps us solve problems and make decisions. It helps us as we evaluate each of our patients' situations. So there's an acronym that says RED, and it's a super simple way to think about it. We recognize symptoms, we evaluate the arguments, and then we draw a conclusion or make a decision. And so if you fail at any any of those 3 points, your patients will most likely suffer. The critical thinking has to be such a part of your nursing identity that you do it automatically during every shift without, you may not even be having to think cognitively about each step, but it should be part of who you are. So in 2016, there were some headlines that said that medical errors were responsible for the third leading cause of death in the United States. So if those numbers were accurate that they were quoting, it would mean that 42% of the people that came into the hospital and died because of a medical error. And that just it feels wrong, after having experienced working in a hospital for a while. It doesn't seem to hold true with what I had experienced. And since 2016, it's been determined that those doctors that studied that and the writers that came up with the headline really extrapolated data incorrectly. And so what I mean by that is they looked at a few small studies and then said that applied to everything, everywhere, all patients, all hospitals. And it just wasn't true. It's kind of like saying, if I polled 100 Texans about how many times they ate barbecue over the last month, and then I took that data and I applied it to the whole United States and said that Americans eat barbecue this many times per month. It doesn't hold true, right? It's not the same situation. At any rate, regardless of how many people die from medical errors each year, whether it's the third leading cause of death or not, if it's preventable, it should be something that we're working to fight against. And so not only is it a legal issue where you could potentially lose your nursing license if you cause harm to someone, but it's also part of our ethos as nurses to help people heal and not to harm them. The possible harm from medical and nursing errors can include death, and so that's just too high of a price to pay for something that's avoidable. So we have got to work towards becoming critical thinkers so we can decrease these errors and decrease sentinel events in our hospitals. And that would be where somebody died inpatient because of something that we've done or didn't do, failure to act. So let's talk about types of reasoning that are just embedded in critical thinking. And the first one is reasoned thought. So reasoned thought means that we don't allow our emotions to affect our cognitive abilities. And this may take practice and time. So don't be disheartened if you struggle with this. Just know the goal and work towards it. And in the meantime, it might mean that you use your peers to help you think through some situations. Demonstrating good clinical judgment means that you understand a situation based on knowledge, data, theory, and scientific inquiry. So somebody could be a really good critical thinker, but maybe they don't know the field of nursing. Maybe they know another field more intimately. And so they could demonstrate reasoned thought, but they may not have great clinical judgment. So our critical thinking as nurses has to include clinical judgment. In addition, registered nurses must collaborate with other members of the healthcare team, and we have a super complex system in the United States, and so the RN has to be able to work autonomously, and they must be disciplined, rational, and self-directed. Critical thought. Um, Nurses who engage in critical thought will meet more of their patients' needs and affect positive patient outcomes. And I think all of us aims to do that. Other related thinking skills would be diagnostic thinking. And diagnostic thinking is flexible and it embraces complexity. It doesn't just jump to conclusions based on minimal data. It accounts for analysis and intuition, and it does require a good bit of knowledge, nursing knowledge in this case, to employ. Um, Cultivated thinking. The cultivated thinker must have excellent assessment skills. The cultivated thinker cannot be ignorant or arrogant. They must always seek to be learning more. So the cultivated thinker wants to find the best solution, and by staying well informed, they know that they can provide better care for their patients. Deductive reasoning is going from broad information to specific details, and we as nurses do this every day when we perform the nursing process and create a plan of care. Whether or not as an LVN you are legally responsible for formulating a plan of care, I would be willing to bet that most, if not all, of you go to work and you receive a report on your patients and you have in your mind what you're going to do to help your patient that day. Things that you know have worked for your patients in the past, things that you were taught that work well for patients of that type. And so you participate in this situation, even though you're not an RN yet. But you will formally be legally required to do a very good job at care planning in the future when you become a registered nurse. Inductive reasoning occurs when a patient presents with symptoms or problems that the nurse has seen before. And so inductive reasoning comes from education and experience. The patient presents with symptoms that you recognize, and then you draw conclusions. And so I want you to look at this slide for a second. It says the strength of the nurse's conclusion is based on their knowledge and experience. And when you get out of nursing school, you don't have all the knowledge that there is, and you certainly don't have all the experience that there is. So you can always improve in inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning goes from specifics to generalities based on the supporting data. So here's a practice question about related thinking skills, and it says, after a nurse gathers data from the assessment and identifies needs, the nurse develops a care plan. The nurse is demonstrating which type of reasoning? A, inductive, B, intuitive, 3, deductive, and 4, point of view. So go ahead and look back over your notes and see what you think. Okay, so the correct answer is number 3, deductive, because you're taking general assessment data, drawing conclusions, identifying problems or needs, and formulating a plan of care. So that's the deductive reasoning process. If you got it right, good job. Pat yourself on the back. Next, Richard Paul listed 8 elements of critical thought, and the first is purpose. Basically, why are we using critical thinking? Um, so ask yourself, why are you going to use critical thinking as a nurse? Why are you going to do that? I know my answer, and that is to provide better patient care for my patients, right? I want better outcomes. I want them to do well. I want them to heal. And so I don't want anybody to come to harm while they're under my care. I don't want anybody to, get worse and worse and worse and me not recognize those things. I want my patients to have excellent care. The second element is the question at issue. And this is going to change based on the patient and situation. So you'll need to ask yourself, What question am I even asking? The third element is point of view. The RN has to recognize that there are different points of view for nearly every situation. So you need to ask yourself how others might view the situation. And whether or not you agree with other people's perspective is completely irrelevant. The important thing is that you can imagine what other people might be viewing about the situation and that you respect it. The fourth element is available information. We make decisions based off of the information that we have available at the time we make the decision. So if you've ever made a decision and then it turned out to be the wrong one, in hindsight, you look back and you think, I wish I had known X, Y, or Z in order to make a better decision and have a better outcome. I know I've done that before, and I would bet that some of y'all have too. So this element should encourage us to be inquisitive, and it should give you a desire to ask the right questions so you can gain the information that you need to make good decisions. Concepts are ideas that represent something, like a solution that doesn't even have a tangible representation yet. And assumptions are educated guesses or hypotheses or beliefs that are accepted as truth without proof. Assumptions actually can be really detrimental to reasoning and critical thought because we don't stop to wonder whether or not they are true. So if we make decisions based on faulty assumptions and we haven't really challenged them yet, we assume them to be true, we might end up making poor decisions. We've got to recognize assumptions and then test them to see if they're true. Implications and consequences can be expected or unexpected. For each decision you consider for your patient, you've got to ask yourself, what are the implications of this train of thought? And you also have to ask yourself, if I continue down this path, what will be the consequences? The eighth and final element of critical thinking is inferences, and an inference is just a conclusion of the process. Next, let's talk about the structure of critical thought. It's not linear, just like the nursing process isn't linear. Remember how I showed you the image of the nursing process? This is the image I've shown you before. So critical thinking says that for each of these steps in the nursing process, the nurse should be prodded or should be asking more questions. So maybe you thought this image looked a little complicated before, but now it's much more detailed because we're asking questions at each of these stages. Next, I'm going to talk about attributes of the critical thinker. So as I go through these attributes, I want you to ask yourself, do I demonstrate that attribute? For instance, the first attribute is curiosity. So I have to ask myself, am I curious? Do I relentlessly pursue the truth? And if I'm being honest, I can point to times in my life where I have accepted a conclusion because I was just tired or lazy, or too busy thinking about things from my own personal life. And so I have to develop some discipline in myself to practice curiosity, even when I don't feel like it. RNs must be willing to diligently pursue evidence and information when we are decision making. I have to be willing to collaborate with others and not let pride get in the way of patient care. RNs must display rational thought. I've got to learn from each experience so I can have a large bank of experiences to draw upon when planning interventions in the future. An RN must demonstrate the attribute of reflection. We must be willing to examine ourselves and our decisions, even if it shows that we didn't make the best decision. Humility is important. And so I have to ask myself, am I humble? An RN must be creative. And this one has been especially important, I think, in recent years because we were told, we had to follow certain infection prevention strategies, but then it seemed like we didn't always have what we needed in order to follow those infection prevention strategies. So we had to be creative and figure out how to best take care of our patients without, all of the supplies or things that we thought that we needed. Lastly, intuitive thought is necessary for the nurse who is thinking critically. Don't ignore your intuition. Assess your patient and search for the information that you need to try to substantiate your intuition. If you feel like a patient's not doing well and you can't quite put your finger on it, pursue the data that you need to demonstrate whether or not that patient really is doing well and is safe. It's an important quality, and I promise you it saves lives every day. Don't ignore your intuition. So this is our second practice question. It's about attributes of the critical thinker. A nurse wants to develop attributes of a critical thinker. So which attributes should the nurse practice? Number 1, intuitive thought, predetermining purpose, diagnostic thinking. Number 2, concepts, assumptions, consequences. Number 3, rational thought, inferences, implications. And number 4, reflection, creativity, curiosity. When I do a multiple choice question like this with words that have definitions that kind of seem to overlap sometimes or get muddied in my brain, what I'm going to do is think about everything that I learned from this chapter, and I'm going to find things there that are not attributes of a critical thinker. So which of these include things that are not attributes of critical thinkers? Well, the first three. The first three include things that are not attributes of critical thinkers. It's number 4, reflection, creativity, and curiosity. And those 3 things are all attributes of a critical thinking nurse. This last slide just kind of provides a final thought for the concept of critical thinking. Critical thinking is rooted in discipline, meaning that we do it regardless of how much effort and time that it takes. It's going to require you to test your thoughts daily for clarity, accuracy, specificity, relevance, logic, consistency, depth, and significance. Think of a time when you've seen a nurse demonstrate these characteristics. And what was the outcome? Hopefully a good one, probably a good one. If a negative outcome ever came after a nurse used high quality critical thinking, can the nurse be satisfied that they've done everything they could? I think so. I think we aim for positive outcomes, but when negative ones happen and we've done a really good job taking care of our patients, I think that we can accept that more easily. Our consciousness doesn't, it doesn't hurt so bad. When we know we've done absolutely everything we could and we still had a negative outcome. So, if you have any questions about the content, please reach out to me or your local instructor. We would be glad to help you. Bye.